Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent, let's start over. I ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. The price of everything is going up. Outbreaks of measles and bird flu are killing people. Airplanes are almost crashing or actually crashing and falling out of the sky. Tens of thousands of federal workers, including veterans, are being laid off in Donald Trump's government purge. And so, obviously, it's a Monday, and we've got 2 votes tonight, and so we're going to address one of those critical issues. Oh, no, actually, we're going to do something totally irrelevant to 99.9% of all people across the country. Now let's just start with the basics, which is that everyone has and deserves human dignity without stipulations or preconditions. Not just the people you like, not just the people you understand, not just the people you agree with. Every human being is God's creature. And everyone, especially in the United States of America, has the right to be left alone. That is what freedom means, right? You've got to be left alone to live your life however you want within the bounds of the law. And so, what Republicans are doing today is inventing a problem to stir up a culture war and divide people against each other. And worse, they're trying to distract people from what they're actually doing, which is at a time when people are finding it harder and harder to afford the basic necessities, at a time when diseases we eradicated almost 20 years ago are making a comeback and killing kids, at a time when people are getting on flights and saying an extra prayer or breathing a little heavier, you have Donald Trump and the Republicans saying, you know what? Let's cut taxes for billionaires. Let's take money from regular people and the things that they rely on, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act. Let's take hundreds of billions of dollars from there and shovel it into the pockets of the richest people to have ever walked this earth, because that's what we need and that is what people voted for. Republicans are focusing on the wrong 1%. Trans people are not the reason people can't afford groceries or health care or housing. The other 1%, the top 1% economically, is responsible for a lot of that. And that's who Republicans are desperate to help. And they're doing it by going after some of the most vulnerable people in our society. I will be joining my Democratic colleagues in voting no on the pending legislation. Madam President, I ask consent that the following remarks appear in a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, we are witnessing one of the worst starts to any presidency in generations, and it's not even close. There is the possibility of negative growth in the first quarter of this year, which would have been unheard of, so bad economically that the Secretary of Commerce is trying to concoct another way to calculate GDP. If you wonder how bad the data is, you got the Secretary of Commerce going like, well, this whole GDP thing, we've been measuring it wrong for all of these decades. There is no comparison for the staggering levels of incompetence and lawlessness coursing through this administration. And regular people are paying a steep price. Tomorrow night, the president will try to rewrite his record and recast blame when he addresses Congress. I want to go over some of the worst things that he's done that actually hurt people. Because unless you're a billionaire, life has gotten harder, not easier, over the last couple of months. Number one, he's actively raising the price of everything. He is actively raising the price of everything. after specifically promising that he would bring down prices on day one. He has gone out of his way to raise them. The price of eggs is up 15%. Coffee prices are at record highs. And the price of everything from tomatoes to strawberries to clothes to toys to cars to homes and home building is about to go up starting tomorrow because Trump is picking a needless fight with our largest trading partner with tariffs. Prices will skyrocket, businesses will be hurt, and people will lose their jobs. Number two, not even a week into his second term, Trump illegally froze federal funding for all 50 states. All 50 states. With one Monday night memorandum, the White House locked states out of portals for everything from Medicaid payments to housing assistance. Schools, child care centers, rural hospitals, VA clinics were suddenly left wondering if they would have to close their doors or lay off staff. Almost a month later, the taps are not fully turned back on as a result of the freeze and Trump's other executive orders. Hundreds of billions of dollars continue to be withheld from states and communities where they belong. These are taxpayer dollars. These are dollars that are appropriated by this branch of government, the Article I branch of government. So if you don't like how appropriated funds are going to be spent, there is a mechanism for an executive branch to do something about it. They can propose a new budget, and they can either sign or veto a new appropriations bill. But that's not what they did. They just acted as though they could cross out things that they found objectionable. And it's not even as though they did that in some sort of methodical way. They had a bunch of kids going in there, literally kids, Control F. Oh, gender, kill that. Oh, native, kill that. Oh, climate, kill that. That's how they figured out what they were going to cut. Number three, Trump is illegally firing tens of thousands of government workers, many of whom are veterans. And he's not done yet. These are people who've dedicated their careers to public service, and in the case of veterans, risked their lives to protect our country. And they're just like the rest of us, bills to pay, kids to feed, parents to care for. And they're being discarded. This is the biggest mass firing of veterans in the United States' history. Number four, no one stands to benefit more from this ransacking of the government than billionaires, which is no surprise considering it's being led by the richest people on the planet. Eliminating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that was created in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis specifically to protect people from fraud and deceptive lending practices, or dramatically shrinking the IRS, which means refunds will be delayed during tax season and tax fraud will skyrocket without proper scrutiny. None of that benefits a regular person. None of that benefits a regular person. But it's great news if you're a billionaire trying to wiggle out of paying taxes or a shady lender who's looking to defraud people. Number five, if all of this wasn't enough, Trump and the Republicans are working to cut taxes for billionaires and make regular people foot the bill. Now, that's not unusual for them. Cutting taxes for billionaires is kind of their thing. They like it. It is their reason for being. But it's alarming nonetheless in the brazenness of how they're going about doing this. They basically want to cut money that goes to regular people and book that as savings, right? So whenever you do a tax bill, if you're doing it right, it pays for itself, which means you have to have something on the side of the ledger where you're bringing in more money, and then another side of the ledger where you're cutting revenue, and then it adds up to zero, it nets out, deficit neutral. The problem is they can't really figure out how to deliver this $4 trillion or so tax cut to the wealthiest corporations that have ever existed in human history and do it in a deficit neutral way. And so they are just like committing arson within departments and then trying to book that as savings to pay for the tax cut. Now, it is true that all political parties have a tendency towards exaggeration. And so you'd be forgiven if you hear this, you go like, well, it's a Democrat saying this is what the tax policy is, and maybe it's not exactly like that. But I want you to understand that what's happening in the U.S. House as they negotiate over this big tax bill is exactly that. They're demanding more and more cuts from the Affordable Care Act, from Social Security Administration in terms of the staffing of the place, from Medicaid, where they want to turn it into block grants, which is just a euphemism for Medicaid cuts. And then they want to take all of those savings and not like reinvest it in some other part of the government, right? Not put it in the Department of Education, not give it to low-income individuals so that they can climb out of poverty. They actually just want to take trillions of dollars from you and give it to them. Madam President, I ask that these final remarks appear in a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Since taking office just over a month ago, Donald Trump has rapidly obliterated America's standing as the leader of the free world. Decades of hard work, extraordinary sacrifice, and painstaking bipartisan diplomacy to lead our allies and partners against the forces of autocracy and repression have been crushed. And America's reputation as the indispensable nation is in tatters. And it started with the illegal dismantling of the United States Agency for International Development and continued with the unlawful elimination of virtually all foreign assistance and culminated this last weekend, Friday, with the Oval Office meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky last week. Trump has undermined American values and interests at every turn. This is not a doctrine that somehow puts America first. Past presidents of both parties in different words and through different means have aggressively pursued American interests. And I have to say, on the specific question of how USAID operates with the State Department, you hear secretaries of state of both parties saying, hey, it would be great if USAID and the State Department were better aligned. And so I'm the top Democrat on the SFOPS committee, which is the funding committee for foreign aid, and I sat down with the chairman, Lindsey Graham, and I said, I think there's some opportunity to do some bipartisan work here in reforming the foreign aid enterprise. We had a really constructive conversation. That was 2 days before all hell broke loose at USAID. All hell broke loose at USAID. Trump froze all foreign assistance and then moved to illegally shutter USAID, which is responsible for implementing most of our foreign aid. None of it was about achieving efficiency or rooting out waste. It was about Trump trying to wish away whatever parts of the federal government he doesn't like in violation of the law, in violation of the Foreign Assistance Act, in violation of the Constitution, in violation of the Prompt Payments Act, in violation of every appropriations bill that we've ever passed as it relates to USAID since the original Foreign Assistance Act. Like, this is not actually a close call. You can hate USAID. I don't. I think it's great. Or you can think it needs reform. I also think it needs reform. But the way to enact a law is to enact a law. The way to enact a law is not to just break the law and see if a judge will impose parameters on you. Trump literally fired the people whose job it is to identify and combat waste. That is not the kind of thing that you would do if you were interested in combating waste. There was a person at USAID who basically wrote a bunch of factual memorandums to senior staffers saying, this is the consequences of what you're doing. And among other things, it said specifically, hey, you might have a waiver program in place to allow life-saving aid to continue, but you sent everybody home and locked them out of their email. They sent everybody home and locked them out of their email, and then we're to believe that this waiver process is somehow going to push through the billions of dollars for life-saving aid that are needed and expected. And so what is happening? And these big providers, I won't even name them because they're so terrified. Good organizations no political valence. If they have any political inclination, they tend to be Christian organizations doing literally God's work all across the planet. They are laying off people. They are literally closing up tents. People are flying home back to the continental United States or Hawaii or Alaska, wherever they live, and just saying, we're out of here now. So babies are getting HIV/AIDS from their moms now because the PEPFAR funding is frozen. And don't let anybody tell you that PEPFAR is unfrozen. Everything is frozen. Why? Because, and I might be getting this number slightly wrong, but as I recall it, there's about 70 people left. And this is a tens of billions of dollars enterprise. So how the hell are you going to consider a waiver for 5,800 individual programs when you have 70 human beings, not all of them in this particular bureau, to try to process the waivers? And so what I've been told is, hey, if there's anything that's especially important to you, sir, let me know. And I'm thinking, I'm not here to petition the king for mercy. The way this works is everybody operates within the law. We lost the election. Democrats lost the election. We lost the House, we lost the Senate, and we lost the presidency, and we lost it all fair and square. But now it's on Republicans to operate fair and square. And what's happening at USAID, I understand this is not the most compelling issue for people back home in Hawaii or people back home in Alabama or people back home in Illinois or anywhere. It is not like most people's burning desire, but people do understand following the law or not following the law. And what is happening right now is plainly unlawful. They are violating multiple statutes. And the consequences are not some like arcane discussion about legal principles or the rule of law. Millions of people will die. I'm still new enough to the Senate. I'm not that new to the Senate, but I'm still new enough to the Senate where I don't say anything I don't mean to say on the floor. And so I want anybody who is listening to understand, if we don't resolve this, millions of people will die. Millions of people will die because of an illegal decision made by this administration. And so we all have to decide, are we going to stand up for some basic American values? What are those American values? We are the good guys. When people see that USAID logo, they should say, awesome, the Americans are here. When they see that food grown in Georgia, processed in the mid-Atlantic states, grown in Kansas and other places, when they see that food arriving to prevent malnourished kids from going in the wrong direction, they should say, I am so thankful that America exists, not just as a country, but as an idea. We are the good guys. And part of being the good guys is even if you hate something, if it's a law, it's a law. There are a lot of laws on the books that I hate. Global gag rule, first one that comes to mind, but there are probably a dozen more I could come up with. It literally never occurred to me to ask Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Donald Trump or anyone else to violate the statute and see what the judge says. And so we, as the Article I branch, and we as patriots, have to wrap our arms around this problem, get the aid enterprise back up and running for humanitarian reasons, for geopolitical reasons, for legal reasons, for moral reasons, and for reasons related to what we are here to do, which is we are here, if this enterprise needs to be reformed, count me in. But this is a law-making process, not a law-breaking process. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
The Democratic Whip.
Madam President, I want to thank my colleague from Hawaii. And if he can spare 30 seconds, I'd like to tell him a story. Years ago, I went to India, to the dusty villages, not the big cities, just to see what USAID was doing. I'd heard about it. I wanted to see it. The most graphic example I can remember from that experience was when they showed me a bag of some grain supplement, and on it was written USAID, from the people of the United States of America. And what they were doing with this was making a lunch for the children in the village. I don't think your kids or mine would have touched it. It looked like some odd Rice Krispie ball that was held together with water. And they sat with little tin plates with this Rice Krispie ball on it from the USAID package to eat their lunch. But before they ate their lunch, they paused, and I said, "What's going on?" And the guide said to me, "They're saying a prayer of thanks to this United States of America for giving them food to eat." I thought to myself, for goodness sakes, it's 1% of our federal budget, 1% that we spend in this manner to try to give kids around the world a chance to survive. There are many other things we do, but that basic example of those kids sitting in the dust of that village, eating that Rice Krispie ball, and thanking the United States of America for it, touched my heart and still does to this day. Thanks for what you said. I appreciate it so much. I also want to say a word about what we're going to vote on today, an issue that's going to come before us. I might ask my colleagues if they could answer the following question. How many athletes, NCAA athletes, are there in the United States? I asked Mr. Baker, former governor of Massachusetts, that question. And he said over 500,000. 500,000. And I said, of all those athletes, what percentage are transgender? Oh, fewer than 10. I said, fewer than 10%? No, fewer than 10 total out of 500,000 are transgender. And yet we're going to come to the floor with a proposal from Senator Tuberville to vote on this issue. He's going to attempt to bring to this floor a bill that targets trans youth. This bill would revoke federal funding from schools with athletic programs that allow trans girls to participate on sports teams for women or girls. The bill, which has no enforcement mechanism, could subject women and girls to physical inspection by an adult if someone from an opposing team accused them of being transgender. Think about that for a second. Your daughter, someone in your family, going to play a sport, and someone on the other team challenges them. That's not a little girl, that's a transgender boy. This bill that we're about to vote on gives authority to someone to make a physical inspection of that little girl if someone from the opposing team accuses them of being transgender. Does that sound a little extreme to you? Well, it sure does to me too. This infringes on the privacy of girls and women and is a dangerous use of the powers of government to target children and their families. Put yourself in the shoes of these families for just a moment. Imagine being the parent of a trans kid and telling your child they are not even allowed to play on the same sports team as their friends at school because a politician said they couldn't. Coincidentally, Madam President, I had a hearing on this subject, and in 2023, a teenager named Harley Walker, a 16-year-old transgender girl from the state of Alabama, spoke with an unwavering voice in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee about what it was like to be one of the children who are affected by these anti-transgender laws. Harley Walker, from home state of Alabama, had enacted a law threatening her ability to access the care she needs to be happy and healthy. Harley told the committee, and I quote her words exactly, "I want all of you to look at me, here and now, and hear my words. I am a very happy 16-year-old. I have wonderful friends who accept me for who I am. I'm active in my school's debate team and other extracurriculars. I'm just trying to be a teenager in America," she said. same as any other teen. But I keep having to jump through hoops that other people my age don't have to. I'm here in front of this committee instead of enjoying summer vacation just to try to ensure that my right to exist isn't taken away. It's that personal. It's that important. And we're going to vote here to give someone unspecified the right to physically inspect a girl or a young woman if the other opposing team accuses them of being transgender. My goodness. Is this what we're all about here in the United States Senate? Madam President, on a separate topic, tomorrow night members of Congress and their guests will gather on the floor of the House to hear the President on the status of our nation. This annual address traces its roots back to founding fathers, but I doubt that they would even recognize their beloved country today. With President Trump and Elon Musk acting unrestrained, we are barreling down a dangerous path to a constitutional crisis. In the Judiciary Committee, which you serve on, we had 3 witnesses last week, nominees to serve in important positions in the Department of Justice. The question that was asked of them was very basic. Would you advise a public official in the United States of America to follow a court order? Just that simple, to follow a court order. And they hemmed and they hawed and they said, generally so, generally this. The most lucid statement was made by a Republican Senator, John Kennedy of Louisiana, who said, the answer is yes. You either follow a court order or you resign your office. It is that basic. But if you listen to those 3 witnesses, there's a serious question whether that would happen. It's a question as to whether or not there is any check or balance on the executive branch if they will not live by the findings of a court. It troubles me. It continues to trouble me. And it's at the heart of our concern about the future of our Constitution. Madam President, I'm going to have a guest at the State of the Union address tomorrow night, Dr. Elizabeth Sokol. She's from Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago. I know that hospital well. My daughter was treated there for years. I think it's one of the best on God's green earth. For more than a decade, Dr. Sokol has been a pediatric oncologist at Lurie Children's in Chicago. She treats young children with neuroblastoma, the leading cause of cancer death for children age 1 to 5. Dr. Sokol's work, which includes conducting clinical trials on neuroblastoma brain cancer research, is funded by the National Institutes of Health. The NIH is quite simply the premier medical research agency in the world. It provides over $38 billion in research funding to all 50 states, including yours and mine, studying everything from pediatric cancer to dementia, Alzheimer's, ALS, diabetes care, and heart disease. Breakthrough research supported by the NIH has made a difference. You know all those ads you see on television about those drugs? You can hardly pronounce their names or remember them. People skipping through a field of flowers, feeling better because they take a certain drug. 99% of all the new drugs in the United States, all of them, 99%, started in research at the National Institutes of Health. If they're good and they're important, you can credit taxpayers for creating an agency that does the research. That breakthrough research has made a difference in the lives of thousands of people. Yet this is one of the agencies, the National Institutes of Health, that President Trump is dismantling through a series of abrupt, illegal, devastating funding cuts, gag orders, and mass firings. As a result of President Trump's actions, Dr. Sokol's work on neuroblastoma in kids, brain cancer in kids, and the lives of the kids who depend on it is in serious danger. Rather than empty rhetoric, Dr. Sokol actually does the work to make America great, offering families hope. You don't think that these families think it's great if she can find something to cure their child? Donald Trump and Elon Musk are trying to stop her. That sounds like a rash political statement, but it's true. At the same time, Dr. Sokol's hospital, Lurie's Children, is staring down massive cuts to Medicaid for life-saving treatment of critically ill children. Medicaid is the lifeline for Children's Hospital. If we go through with the planned budget we hear from the House, the cutbacks of 14.5% in Medicaid funding will dramatically hit American hospitals. Rural hospitals will close, children's hospitals will close, programs will be shut down. Medicaid is their lifeline. It covers nearly half the kids in this country. If you slash Medicaid funding for Lurie Children's in Chicago, Cincinnati Children's in Ohio, Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, you are harming life-saving treatment for kids with cancer and other serious conditions. For as long as I can stand and speak, I'll be standing and speaking in support of NIH funding and the work of people like Dr. Sokol. She's my guest tomorrow night because I want my colleagues, when we sit down together for a light dinner before the address, to meet this NIH researcher and hear from her firsthand what the cuts of Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing to children's research in America. Surely we are better than that. The last point I want to make is this, Madam President. Today is a special day in the state of Illinois, and no other state that I know of today. It is Kazimierz Pulaski Day. Kazimierz Pulaski was a Polish patriot who decided to help America in the Revolutionary War. He came over, and his military experience led him to create the U.S. Cavalry. He was in a battle of Savannah and severely wounded and died. He served our country as a patriot, even though he was a Polish person, not an American. Well, we take that pretty seriously in Chicago, where there are more people of Polish ancestry than any other place on earth except for Warsaw, Poland. We're pretty proud of that fact. And today we were proud of the fact that the president of Poland came to Chicago. President Duda and his wife were given a warm welcome at the Polish National Museum. And I recall the time, it really wasn't that long ago, when finally the Iron Curtain came down. And we had a question to ask. How are we going to protect the nations that used to be part of the Warsaw Pact, or nations that used to be Soviet republics? What is going to protect them if they want to aspire to democracy and move toward the West? We came up with the obvious answer. There was only one alliance that could protect them, the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Because in the 80 years now that it's been in existence, it's done its job of avoiding World War III and strengthening the countries in the alliance, because we stand arm in arm next to one another. As I said today, it was a Pulaski moment. The United States and Poland standing together again for the future of both of their nations. I believe in NATO, and I don't know what it will do without it, but now we have to consider that. This new president, just a few weeks into his presidency, is threatening the very future and existence of NATO. If we walk away from it, if the United States disengages from NATO, the question is whether or not Europe can stand on its own feet. I think they will eventually. But in the meantime, countries like Poland, the Baltic nations, and many others are vulnerable to Putin's aggression. What he did in Ukraine 3 years ago, and even before that, he will do again. And smaller nations don't have a prayer in fighting him. I am saddened, shocked, stunned at what happened in the Oval Office last week with President Zelensky. To have that display in live television breaks my heart. To think that this situation is such that we would humiliate our ally in Ukraine and at the same time talk about the greatness of Vladimir Putin, just I find disgusting. People are no students of history if they buy into that thinking. For the longest time, we've stood with the people of Ukraine. Do you know what the briefing was when they invaded Ukraine? They called the senators down, and the intelligence agency says, let me tell you what's going to happen when finally Putin pulls the trigger and invades Ukraine. Those Ukrainians will last between 3 days and 2 weeks. That was it, 2 weeks if they're good. And then it'll be a guerrilla war. Well, they were certainly wrong. Here we are 3 years later, and the Ukrainians are still fighting. How many Ukrainians have died so far? We can't come up with an accurate figure, but we know 46,000 have died. 46,000 have died fighting Putin, who invaded their country. And this president calls the head of the Ukrainian country, Zelensky, a dictator, and says that he actually invaded his own country. What in the world is he talking about? These people have been fighting to the death. Millions have been displaced, and they have been standing up for the values that we cherish in this country. To walk away from them and to subject their leader to what we saw last Friday in the Oval Office is disgusting, humiliating, below the dignity of the United States. I stand behind Ukraine. Maybe that's why I'm wearing this tie today. I stand behind Ukraine because I believe those people are fighting for the very values that we treasure. and they stood by the United States, and they've said thank you many, many times to me and to others. We need to stand behind NATO and Ukraine and stand for the values that are important. Hitching our star to Vladimir Putin is a fool's errand. It is a disaster waiting to happen. I hope to goodness we don't reach that point. And I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.